Well, I'm joined now from Westminster by Gary McKinnon's MP, David Burrowes, and from Washington by the lawyer David Rivkin, who was White House counsel to Presidents Reagan and Bush Sr. David Rivkin, how do you think the current administration will view this decision?
Not well, and the same is true about the American people. I would say it's quite preposterous. We have an individual that's clearly mentally capable to stand trial. We have a legal justice system that is quite capable of protecting inmates in our penal system who are at risk of suicide. What does it take now? So anybody who says, I'm going to kill myself, should not be extradited, why bother arresting him? What if you were to say, if you arrest me in Britain, I'll kill myself? It's laughable.
David Burrowes.
Well, it's not laughable, it's not preposterous. I'm not sure if David has seen the medical evidence that I've seen, and which the Home Secretary saw, which describes someone who wasn't mentally capable of going through the process of extradition. It's not the issue of how he was dealt with in America or how he would be dealt with. It's the fact of extradition. He was in a dark tunnel which was described by his doctors as one which would lead inevitably to suicide, and they could give no reassurance to authorities that anything would prevent that happening. And on that exceptional grounds, on that particular evidence, that was the reasons why the Home Secretary invoked her discretion that it breached his human rights.
David Rivkin?
Again, I don't think it makes sense. I can assure you that if Mr. McKinnon was brought to New York or any other place in the United States and was put in conditions of confinement, he would not succeed in killing themselves. Our penal system
but that's
is
quite a claim.
good.
I mean, how many hundreds of Americans commit suicide in prison every year? It's quite a lot.
Well, an individual who's indicated in advance that he is thinking about committing suicide, be placed on a suicide watch. He would not have shoelaces, he would have any other implements of ending his life.
It doesn't always work, though, does it?
My point is this: unless a person is mentally incapable of standing trial, you can't escape responsibility for what you've done by claiming that you'll commit suicide and by all sorts of abuses. It's not a serious argument.
David Burrowes, you're trying to get...
One of the doctors did find that he would be unfit to stand trial, but the reality is he wouldn't make it to New York. He wouldn't make it across the shores, because the fact of extradition, the decision, would itself lead to him committing suicide.
But how do you answer David Rivkin's point that anybody, can anybody now just say, I'm going to commit suicide if you extradite me?
No,
David Burrowes.
Everyone is entitled to respect for their human rights. Now, the fundamental right of life, if that is invoked and if there's clear evidence that they're going to take their life and there's proper evidence around it, then plainly that has to be considered carefully in every case. In Gary McKinnon's case, the reality is that exceptionally over a period of 10 years, and that process itself had led to him leading to the position where he would have to take his life. And that is something which the Home Secretary felt was unacceptable.
I heard the same argument about Mr. Abu Hamza. We have an individual who delays his extradition by appealing every possible way to the European court system for 10 years. When we hear a claim that that process itself somehow debilitated him. And the final point, don't you have any respect for your own justice system? Are you saying that Britain is incapable of transporting a prisoner to the United States about the person committing suicide? That's absurd.
Are you telling me that if there was a Gary McKinnon in the US and in those same circumstances with the evidence of someone who is likely to kill himself in the whole circumstance, are you telling me that the US authorities wouldn't do all they can to keep him there and to face justice in the US?
Let me answer this question. Let me answer. We have the world's most liberal extradition system. All you have to do is to make a very low threshold probable cause showing the person is indeed being sought for extradition.
David Rivkin,
be extradited.
Let me just ask you, the whole system is changing now, and a British judge will get to decide on future cases rather than the Home Secretary getting this final say. I mean, how do you feel about that? Do you have respect for the British judges to take that decision?
I have absolutely no problem with judicial engagement, which, by the way, was present in this case. The question is under what standard? It has to be the same reasonable standard, whether or not the person has been charged, there's probable cause for it. If you're going to have a nebulous standard in the best interest of justice, you might as well pack it up. I don't know what it means.
Nebulous. Interest of justice. Justice means an important principle. What does it mean? In our country, justice means an incredibly important factor, dealing with the issue of evidence, but also their circumstances and whether it is in the interest of justice.
David Burrowes, last question. There is a suspicion that the truth is the Conservative Party had made his mind up about this. Before the election, David Cameron had supported Gary McKinnon in opposition. You'd made statements on this. You got the evidence you wanted because you were afraid of the Daily Mail and others who would criticise you if you sent Gary McKinnon to the US. What do you say to
Well,
that?
the reality is he made clear election promises that has been delivered to show compassion to this man and to ensure that he did not go overseas to face trial. And he delivered on his promises, and that's something which he should be applauded, not denigrated for. And the reality is it's based, and indeed it was in the balance until very recently. It's not something that was in the bag at all. It was carefully considered, this compelling medical evidence that he'd have taken his life. And for that element of showing justice and compassion, this country should be applauded and not condemned.
OK, David Burrowes, David Rivkin in Washington, thank you both very much indeed.